There's a lot that you can do in Photoshop, and there's tons of different tools that are really powerful. But when it comes right down to it, perhaps the most important is one of the most basic aspects of Photoshop, and one of the key components that was added fairly early on in its life, although it didn't actually start with this. So what I'm talking about is layers. So if we launch Photoshop, let's look at them a bit. Now I'm using CS6, so if you're using CC, there may be a few slight differences here or there, but for the most part, the key concept is the same. This is the layers panel down here. Before we can do anything though, we need an actual document. So I'm going to go up to File, New, and just select whatever. It doesn't really matter for right now because we're just talking about things and playing with things. So we've got a document, and now we see something in our layers panel. If you don't have your layers panel, you can add it from the window menu up here. If yours looks entirely different and you want it to look like mine, go into the Essentials workspace. If you are in the Essentials workspace and it still looks different, reset it. That should make it look like this. So if I've accidentally moved things around and I've lost some of them, resetting it puts it back the way it was. So you can see that I have this one layer here, right? And I can draw on this layer and that's fine. Now if I want to like move something or do something, it's not happy. So in my history panel, I'll go ahead and undo that. And down here in my layers panel, I'm going to add a new layer. So we've got buttons down here, right? And the new layer one is the most important one to start with. So now we have a new layer, and I can draw stuff on this new layer, right? And that's fine. I can also draw stuff on the original background, or I can make another new layer, and I can draw stuff on here too. Let's actually make this a little bigger, just so you can actually get a better feel for things. And let's change this to a hard brush, and we'll talk about some of this later. So we've got this blue mass here, and if we switch back to this layer and I switch colors again, we have a brown mass here. Now the way that Photoshop works is it's not object-based. I can't just grab this blue mass and move it. If I move things, it will move whatever is on the layer. Now if you're in CC, the newer version, it actually does work a little differently. They did start to make things a little bit more object-based, and you can sort of click through layers onto stuff below. But in CS6, you can't. This layer, where no matter where I choose it, moves what is on this layer. Now if I draw on the same layer, like let's choose a new color, and I choose green, and I color with green, and then I want to maybe move the green off of the brown, I can't. They're on the same layer, they're stuck together. When I colored on top of it, on the same layer, I actually lost the pixels that were there. Those are gone, and they're not coming back, unless I use my history panel and haven't gone too far ahead. So layers are sort of like a stack of things, a stack of layers that you can put different things on. I like to think of it as almost like a stack of like pieces of glass that you can like draw stuff on or put images on. For some people, it seems to be a little bit easier if we actually use some sort of physical comparison or physical example. So to give you sort of a different visual for that, so we've got a couple of things here, right? So this is sort of an object-based environment. We've got a giraffe, some grass, a tree. Not the right type of tree, but that's okay. And because it's object-based, I can move any of these around, and they don't really affect one another, right? I just have to grab that thing and I can move it. This is sort of how a vector-based software works, like Illustrator or Inkscape or even SVG. Although my giraffe's being a little weird, but you know, sometimes vector-based softwares do. Now I can move these and I can overlap them, right? So I can put this grass on top of the giraffe's foot. And I can even put the giraffe on top of the tree here. And if I decide I don't like that, I can move things away. So that giraffe's leg is not gone just because the grass was on top of it. This tree, the bottom of it's not gone just because the giraffe was on top of it, right? Each thing is still like its own image, and I can move things around. So that's sort of how vector-based software works. And in addition to that, if I want to put a background in, now if I put it on top, I can't see it, but they're still all there. It's vector-based. I can just make a big rectangle in the back and then put all of my objects back on top of it. So the tree, my grass, my giraffe, which is in kind of two parts now. And that's okay, because that's sort of how it works anyways, right? You typically build things up in vector-based graphics out of smaller chunks, right? Smaller objects. And if I want to modify it a little bit, because vector-based graphics are made with like points and lines, I can like pull different parts of it out and make this tree maybe a little bit thicker. Although it can be a little tricky, but it can be a little tricky with vector-based software too, right? So this seems like a decent enough simulation. And maybe I want to make it a little bit taller too, so we can try to make it a little bit taller. And yeah, something sort of like this. And maybe I want to move the giraffe's legs around a little bit. That's okay. I can move them around. Each one is its own separate object. And not a big deal. I don't have to affect the whole giraffe just to do that. Go back there, tree. And if I want to make them longer, just adjust those points and those lines. And so now this leg's a little bit longer, and I can do the same to the rest. Overall, pretty easy to manipulate without having to like redo a bunch of stuff. And make this leg a little longer. There we go. Oh, sorry, giraffe. And maybe we want to make the neck a little longer, not a big deal. Just move those points around too. And put the head back on and the neck back on. And now our giraffe is a little taller, right? Make sure his horns are okay. Maybe make his head a little bit shorter. There we go. Now, what if we're not using a vector-based format? What if we're using a raster-based format like Photoshop? So here we have a drawing of a giraffe in more of a raster-based format, right? So like, there's not an object there of a giraffe or an object there of a tree. Instead, they're just lines in the shape of a giraffe or in the shape of a tree or so on. And I can't really move things around individually. I have to move the whole thing together. What if I want to make the legs a little bit longer? I can't just pull the lines or the points down. Instead, I actually have to erase them and redraw them to be a little bit longer. Now, what if I want to move this tree? I can't just grab the tree and move it. I actually have to erase it and then redraw it. And hopefully I don't mess up the giraffe at all in the process. So now if I want to put this tree behind the giraffe a little bit, I have to redraw it over here. So I've got the trunk, and we'll do more of these tropical leaves that don't belong in the same environment as a giraffe at all, but that's okay. And let's say that I want to put a background, right? So if I want that green background, like I showed before, now I have to color in all of it, but I have to carefully go around the giraffe and carefully go around the tree and everything else. And that could take a while, and even if it is taking a while, I still might mess something up. So what layers allowed us to do is layers allowed us to draw these separate elements on different parts. So that way we could move stuff around easily without having to delete parts or erase parts or redraw parts. So it really made things a lot more efficient. So if I have my tree here, and I have my giraffe, and they're in separate layers, and here's some grass, and here's some more grass. With each thing being on its own separate layer, I can place them and move them around rather easily. So do I want the tree here? Do I want the giraffe there? How far apart do I want them? Really easy to manipulate them because they're on separate layers. Where do I want this grass? Do I want it here? And what about this one? Where do I want this one? Or maybe I don't like this grass on this side. Maybe I want to flip them. So we can flip it over. And maybe I like that one better there. And I think I like this one better here. That could work rather nicely. There we go. And any of these are pretty easy to move around because each one is on a separate layer. Now I can't just like grab the giraffe and move him. I have to go down to that layer and then I can move the giraffe over. Now if you're in CC, you can actually just grab the giraffe. It depends on which version you're in. Now a lot of times I'll see people new to Photoshop. They'll find something else they like, oh, I don't know, this random book, and they'll just toss it right on top, and they'll wonder like, well, where did my giraffe go? Your giraffe is still there, it's just under the book. So keep in mind that as you're putting things on there, you're creating layers, right? And if your top layer isn't transparent, if it's not see-through, then you can't see your giraffe. And if I get a few more random books, well, we know the other book is still there. Even if we cover it completely, we know the other book is still there, just underneath, right? Same thing with layers. If you put something on top that hides the bottom, it's still there. You just can't see it. So you want to keep in mind the order of your layers. So whatever's on top in the panel will be on top of the stack. So you might have to rearrange them a little bit to do what you want with it. And what if we want my green background? Do we just stick it on top? Well, no, we have to keep in mind the order of the layers. So if we want it in the back, then move it to the bottom of your layers panel, and it can be behind stuff. If we get rid of these books, and we want it behind the giraffe, once again, move it to the bottom of the stack, and then now it's behind the giraffe, and we can still move each part individually without messing up our background, without messing up our giraffe, or etc. That's a whole lot better than using everything on just one layer, right? So it was a great addition to Photoshop, and it's been heavily used by pretty much everyone since then.